Hi everyone, I hope you're all well. Today we're going to make some peanut butter and jam flapjacks. Okay, so the classic combination of salty and sweet, peanut butter being the salty and jam being the sweet. What I'd like you to do whilst you get your hands washed and you've got your area prepared is have a think about some of the substitutes, so the things that you could swap in or swap out of this recipe. So the whole point of my practical today and the next few practicals is 5 ingredients and we get our final dish, but you might be able to put some substitutes in there, you might be able to swap things in and out and you can customize these recipes. Okay, so we've got our peanut butter, we've got our jam today. I'm using blackcurrant jam, you could use strawberry jam or raspberry jam. I'm using smooth peanut butter, but if you've got some crunchy peanut butter, that's fantastic, it'll add a little bit of texture in there. I'm using soft brown sugar and I'm using margarine. So with the sugar you could substitute for caster sugar, okay, and for the margarine the recipe actually calls for salted butter, okay, to add to that salty sweet combination. So I'm using margarine, but you could substitute either way. Okay, first thing I'm going to do, now I've got my hands washed, ready to go, is I'm going to make sure that my oven is on, preheated. The reason we're doing that is just so a little bit later on when we put our food into the oven, it's ready, it's warm, it'll start cooking as soon as it goes in there, rather than waiting for it to warm up as the food's in there. Okay, oven is on. I am going to line one of my baking dishes. So if we just have a look at my example here. So here's an example of a lined baking tray. So of course I'm using one of these takeaway trays. I've got a couple set up. I've used greaseproof paper, and before I've put my greaseproof paper in, I've used a bit of the margarine to create a bit of an adhesive to make sure it stays in there. Okay, so just showing you. So here's my tin ready to go. I've got a sheet of greaseproof paper or baking parchment, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that it's slightly bigger than the tray, because of course when you sort of insert it, it needs to be a little bit bigger. So all I'm going to do is just cut down the corners. This just allows me to wrap it round a little bit more neater. And then all I'm going to do with a spare bit of my greaseproof paper, I'm going to get a bit of margarine on there, and I'm going to add the margarine just to the base and the sides to act as an adhesive, and then I'm going to put that in. I'll just put that. It is a cold hob. So because I've cut those corners, it allows me to wrap it round. Okay. So I've got my dish ready to go. So first section that we're going to move on to is the peanut butter. So I'm going to make sure that my scales are at 0. When I put my saucepan on, it will weigh it, so I need to put it back to 0 again. Again, depending what scales you're using. So you can just about see here, these have just got 2 settings. I'm making sure that it's in the correct unit rather than pounds and ounce. I've got my recipe is in grams. Okay, so I've made sure that it's in grams. And what it's asking me to do is actually put 250 grams of my peanut butter in there. So I'm using 2 spoons, just so then I can scrape it off the first spoon. Using most of this tub of peanut butter. Now of course if you amend this recipe, you might half it, and then you use half the amount of peanut butter. Okay, so I've got my peanut butter in there. I'll just put that to the side. What it actually wants me to do is take some of that peanut butter out, because that is going to go on top of my flapjack once it's finished, ready to go into that oven. Okay, so I've just taken 2 out there. I'm now going to do exactly the same with the jam. So I'm going to take 2 or 3 tablespoons of the jam, and I'm going to put it into a dish. Okay, and again, that is just for a little bit later on. So adding on top of my flapjack before I bake it. So I'm just going to do 2 this time. Okay, so in my pan I have got my peanut butter. I've got my peanut butter for decoration and my jam ready in separate bowls a little bit later on. What I'm now going to do is I'm going to add the sugar and the margarine, and then the rest of the jam to the saucepan. So the skill that we will be focusing on before we bake is melting. So I need 5 tablespoons of my margarine. Okay. So if you've got digital scales, they'll be a little bit more accurate. So I've got my margarine in there. I'm going to get my sugar. So it's asking for 40 grams. The recipe that I've adapted it from actually wanted 80 grams, but it was just so sweet that it was unnecessary, that amount of sugar. Also, we've got to think about our sugar intake. So I've got my margarine, my peanut butter and my sugar in there. Last element to go in there, last ingredient, is 5 tablespoons of the jam. So this is the other part of the jam. Okay, so I've got my 4 ingredients in there, and of course we're doing recipes with 5 ingredients. My last thing I'm going to weigh out is my oats. Okay, so into a separate bowl I'm going to put my oats, and again I'm going to weigh it from 0, and it wants 200 grams of oats. So there's my 5 ingredients ready to make my flapjack. Now, of course, we've talked about substitutes. We could put some fruit in there, some sultanas, some raisins, some cherries. You might take out some of that jam, or you might take out some of that peanut butter, and you might add other ingredients in there like fruit. Okay, so what we're looking at so far is a saucepan with 4 ingredients, and our 5th ingredient is in our mixing bowl ready for a little bit later. Okay, so I've got my jam, my peanut butter, my margarine and my sugar. So I am going to put the back hob on, and I'm going to put it on for a medium heat. I won't put it on any higher. We might start burning the sugar, okay, making it a little bit bitter. So on a nice low to medium heat, we're going to melt our ingredients. My oats are still ready to go here. So whilst you're melting here, it's going to take a couple of minutes for it to warm up. You might want to start getting tidied up, so washing up some of these spoons that you've used. It's really good practice to tidy and clean as you go. Okay, so the processes, the steps in which we're going to make these flapjacks are: we're weighing, we're melting and we're baking. Okay, we'll talk a little bit later about how we're going to know when they are done, when they're completed. Okay, so if you just look at this close up, I would not start stirring it yet, okay, or not stirring it too much, because some of these ingredients are really soft anyway. What you're going to end up doing is just turn it into a thick sludge, which we don't want. Okay, what we want is a nice liquid ready to add our oats to. So you can see that some of the peanut butter is starting to melt. My oven is at temperature. I've got my baking trays ready to go. What I'd really like from everyone for this week is, once you've completed this practical, is to take some photos of the final outcome, and you can submit them onto Google Classroom or using the email, and then that is a portfolio of your work. I'd be really interested also to find out what substitutes you have used instead of some of my ingredients, and you could also describe how the outcome looks and tastes. So, just over here, you can see everything starting to soften, starting to melt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video, and I will carry on the video once this is melted. So you can see my ingredients are pretty much nearly melted. There's a few blobs of margarine that need to just melt a little bit more, but we're pretty much at the stage now where our 4 ingredients are melted and combined. Okay, so what I'm now going to do is I can take that off the heat now. It doesn't need to be melting anymore, doesn't need to be cooking anymore. The next step, really straightforward, we're going to combine our oats straight into the liquid, add the dry into the wet. So I have now combined all my ingredients. It looks like quite a good consistency. It's not too wet, it's not too dry. Of course, if it was really wet here, the contingencies at a backup plan would be to add more of the oats, and vice versa. If it is too dry, it needs more liquid, so you'd possibly melt a little bit more butter. Okay, so there's my mixture. It's off the heat now. Of course, this is still going to be hot, so be really careful with that. So it needs to be cooling down. So what I'm going to do just on this front one is I'm going to spoon on I'm just going to use one of these spoons that I use for the margarine. I'm going to, obviously I've got a few dishes, you might just have the one. I'm going to just put a couple of blobs in there. Just make sure that greaseproof paper is fully stuck down. And you can see I'm just going to spread it out. You don't want it too thick, otherwise the top and the sides will bake and the middle will still be a little bit too soggy. And all I'm going to do now is I'm just going to press it into the corners and make sure it's nice and compact. So I might be able to make a couple more of these. There's my flapjack. So you could just bake that as it is. So that's your basic flapjack with peanut butter and jam in there. But what we're going to do is, just as a little bit of a extra element, is the jam that we put aside from earlier. We're just going to dot it across the top. And I'm going to do the same with the peanut butter. So it's a little bit stickier. Just going to put it across the top there. Right, there we go. So I'm going to make 2 or 3 of these, and then what I'm going to do is I am going to put them on my baking tray. Okay, so if I was to bake my 2 others now, I just evenly distribute them, and I'm going to go into the oven. I'm going to wear my oven gloves going in there. Now, of course, this baking tray is cold, however, the oven's hot, so we need to make sure that we are careful. So we're going to use, just wait, some of the hot air might come out, and if you've got a timer, I would put the timers on for sort of 15 minutes. Mine probably will only take 10 to 15 minutes because it's much smaller. If you are using the bigger dish, it's probably going to look like more like 20 to 25 minutes. That's how long my last one in the video took. So what I would do is put a shorter timer on, just gives you a bit of time to get tidied up, check after 10-15 minutes how it's looking, and that just brings us back round to how will we know when they're done. So we're looking for it to start going golden brown on the top and those edges. Okay, when they come out, it might be golden brown, it might look golden brown, but it might still be a little bit soft. That will happen. Okay, what you'll need to do in that instance is just let it cool down and it will firm up. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video now and I'm going to wait until mine are baked, and then I'll show you what my final outcome looks like. So I'm just going to get my flapjacks out the oven. Bear in mind, we've got to be really careful. Hot air's all going to expel as we go in. Okay, I'm using my oven gloves. And I've got my finished outcomes here. So, whilst that has been cooking, I've washed everything up and I've returned it back to where it needs to go. I've made sure that it was in hot, soapy water, okay, and I've dried it. I've used a tea towel to dry it before I put it away. If you don't dry it or you don't do a good enough job at drying it, then that bacteria will just be sat there multiplying, won't it? Okay, so you need to make sure that it's dried. So, if you just have a look at my outcomes on here, I've done all three. After I've paused the video, I put the other two in, and just for an example, I put the other two in without the jam and the peanut butter on top. You can see that the peanut butter and the jam has melted and it's spread out. You can see on this middle one that it's nice and golden brown. You can see on the edges here it's gone nice and golden brown. This one, perhaps, I might put in for another minute or so, or a few more minutes. You can see that it's starting to go golden brown on the edges there, but it needs to cook a little bit longer on this side. So what I'm now going to do is on my cooling rack, I'm going to be really careful, and I am going to transfer the two that are complete across using my oven gloves. I'm going to put that third one back in for a few more minutes. It might be that there's a little bit more mixture in there. It might be where it was positioned in the oven. Okay, so that one's going to go in for a few more minutes. These two are going to cool down now, and when they are cool enough to handle, so this is going to be incredibly hot, so be careful, what I can do is I can transfer the entire baking parchment, so you need to wait until it's cooled down, move it across, let it cool. If I start slicing it now, what's going to happen is it's just going to start breaking up and it's going to start falling apart. So I need to wait until it's set a little bit more. Okay, so this portion does make 16, so we're talking the small bite-size flapjacks. Okay, plenty to share. As I mentioned earlier, I would really like to see your final outcomes. Okay, so once you've completed them, take a photo of it and send it into school. You can either send it to the Technology Google Classroom or you can send it to the Technology email. Okay, I'd also like you to do a bit of a description. So if you think back to some of the tasks for some of you last week, I asked you to describe the taste, the texture, the aroma and the appearance. I'd like you to do that with this, so do a bit of a taste test and describe how it tastes and it looks and how it smells, okay? So I'm looking forward to seeing your submissions, and good luck